You are an expat in China and you break a leg. What now? Or less dramatic, you have the flu really badly and you feel like home remedies are just not cutting it. You need to see a doctor. Medical insurance is not the most glamorous topics, but it is a very, very important one. And that's why it is what we will be talking about today in the China Expat Spouse podcast. My name is Julie Marks and I am the original China Expat Spouse. And I want to talk a little bit about why it is important, not just important, but vital to have medical insurance as an expat in China. I will be introducing you to the different kinds of facilities that you have access to as an expat in China. We will look at key factors for choosing the right insurance policy. We will look at some problems, some pitfalls that could happen. We will give you some tips if you do not have insurance and also get you on the right path to get started. Let's dive right in. Why do we even talk about this topic? Why is medical insurance so important for expats in China? China's healthcare system is set up quite differently than that of many other countries that I know, in that it doesn't have any general practitioners, any GPs, it doesn't have family doctors, and everything is set up in clinics or hospitals. And that means that whenever something happens medically, you go through this whole process of getting checked into the hospital and pulling a number and paying for this, paying for that. It's very complex and it's very difficult to navigate if you don't speak the language and if you don't know the culture. The out-of-pocket costs can be significant. Why is this? Well, quality healthcare is mostly available in private hospitals. And we'll look at the difference between public hospitals and private hospitals and which one you should choose and why. What types of different medical institutions do expats have access to in China? So, as mentioned before, there are public hospitals and there are private hospitals. The public hospitals are super crowded. They are the most complete usually in the kind of medical coverage that they give, and they are covered by public health insurance. What is public health insurance? Well, anyone who's employed in China is supposed to pay mandatory social security contributions, both the employee and the employer, and one of those is health insurance. And so this health insurance covers what happens at public hospitals. The thing with public hospitals is that going there is kind of a group activity. What do I mean by that? Well, you need one person who goes and who stands in line to pull a number to get the person signed in, the person who needs medical attention. Then somebody else needs to stay with that person because then there's sort of a triage happening where the doctors decide which area of the hospital the person needs to go to. If there's anything that needs to be administered, like a drug, an IV, or something similar, then that needs to be fetched from the pharmacy. So this is not the hospital that supplies it. They just give a paper, and then you need to go and potentially stand in line to get that, pay for it, and then you bring it back, and then it needs to be administered by a doctor or by a nurse. If there are any tests that are being done, the results of those tests need to be fetched. If there are any specimens that need to be taken, those specimens need to be carried to the lab and then picked up, or the results of the tests need to be picked up from the lab and then brought to the specific doctor. All of this is quite complex. It is, of course, at most public hospitals, all in Chinese. And that is why even the Chinese, when somebody needs to go to the hospital, a whole group goes so that you can organize yourselves. You can have one person stay with the person who's sick, and then the others are standing in line, organizing, figuring out when they can get appointments, how they can get appointments, and how to potentially skip lines, and so on and so forth. So all of this to say, public hospitals are not the most efficient, and they are quite stressful, even when you're not sick. And when you're in a medical emergency situation, they're really quite hard to navigate. So that's one option. Another option is a private hospital that very often there are international private hospitals. They have a much higher cost, an exorbitantly higher cost than the public hospitals. But very often they have English-speaking staff. If they are unable to treat something in-house, they will send an English-speaking nurse with the patient to a public hospital, And then the nurse does what usually your group of friends would do, which is stand in line, get the number, organize different tests, organize carrying things from A to B, etc. So those are services that a private international hospital would supply at a cost, of course. So next, let's look at what kind of key factors you should consider when you're choosing medical insurance in China. So the key factors I would look at if I were to choose medical insurance as an expat in China today would be, is the insurance policy covering for international hospitals? Because if it isn't, then there's no point in getting it. Are there any direct billing options? And are there any emergency evacuation clauses? So let's look at those one by one. I mentioned before, private or international hospitals are quite pricey. So if the insurance policy does not cover those, then there is no point in paying for extra insurance for sure. Also, there are some insurance companies that have quite good direct billing options, which means that the insurance company has direct agreements with the different international or private hospitals in China in various cities. And it means that instead of having to upfront the cost and then being reimbursed by your insurance company, the provider will send an invoice to your insurance company immediately. And then all you have to do is put a signature, and then the nurse can take you to wherever you need to go, or you get to see a doctor. You don't have to front any money. That would be the second thing I would look at. And the third thing is that I would choose an insurance policy that covers emergency evacuation. So if you, for any medical reason, need to be transported back to your home country, then that should be covered by health insurance, because that can also be very, very expensive. And some health insurances even cover, in the case of death, transporting the remains back to the home country. That is also an option. The first one is a must. The second one is a nice to have. And the third one depends on how comfortable you are with uncertainty or with taking risk. What are the most common mistakes people make when they choose medical insurance for China as an expat? The biggest mistake would be to assume that their home insurance will cover China automatically. This is not the case for any insurance that I know of, any national insurance, but it would cover an extended stay abroad. And it can get very, very expensive if you don't have coverage. The second point would be to ignore some exclusions that policies make. For instance, there are some policies that will not cover mental health. Becoming pregnant and having a child in China can be very, very expensive if it's not covered by your medical insurance. So as a woman, you definitely want to make sure that that is covered. And also a third problem that may arise is if you do not review the limits on coverage. So sometimes things are covered, but they're not covered 100%, or they are only covered in certain circumstances. I would highly recommend reading the fine print of the policy that you are choosing and choosing the one that makes the most sense in your particular situation. Let's play pretend. You are an expat in China and you did not think about medical insurance. What would be some tips that I would give you to make it through? Well, the first one would be to make sure that you have a nest egg that is accessible to you at all times. So it could be in your WeChat wallet, it could be through Alipay on your bank card. If you're very old school, you could be carrying cash around. But it should be several thousand RMBs so that in case of a medical emergency, you don't get stuck. Second thing is that I would ask you to find local clinics for minor issues. If it's not major surgery, if it's a cough, if it's a cold, if it's something where you feel you need medical attention, but it's not life-threatening, then find a local clinic and start with the local clinic always before you go to an international hospital or to a private clinic. And the third tip I would give you is to keep an emergency contact for translation assistance. If you do not speak Chinese fluently, if you do not read Chinese fluently, if you do not write Chinese fluently, hospital visits are extremely stressful, if not undoable. Please find a local friend who can help you out in this situation. Double please get medical insurance and get a coverage that means that you don't have to rely on those things. How should you get started? Well, the very first thing I would do is ask about employer-provided insurance. Check with your company and find out whether, in addition to the mandatory Social Security that the company needs to pay, they also provide an international health insurance or they provide some assistance. And if that is the case, carefully review that policy and find out what is covered and find out whether that is something that is enough for you or whether you need additional international insurance. That'll be the first tip. The second tip would be to work with an insurance broker who is familiar with expat needs. I highly recommend working with an international firm that has a strong presence in China. Allianz is one that is present all over the globe, but they are very strong in China as well. Ping An is a Chinese one that has some very good policies for international health insurance for expats in China. There are different ones, so go online, get some information, and go from there. And then the third tip is to really, really compare the policies. Look at the different factors that are non-negotiables for you. Make sure that they're included. Also, you can always ask for a revision of the policy. Very often, insurance companies will allow you to add in something else at an extra cost, of course. But if it's one of your non-negotiables, it might make sense to do that. Thank you so much for tuning in and bearing with me until the very end. We've seen that medical insurance for expats in China is not just for peace of mind, but it's really a very important part of your stay in this beautiful country. So I hope that you will tune in next time when there's a new episode coming up of China Expat Spouse. Please remember to hit the subscribe button if you haven't done that yet. Give me a thumbs up if you like the content. Let me know in the comments how you have dealt with this topic of medical insurance. If you have some good recommendations for others, good insurance brokers to work with, etc., please let me know. And I will see you next time. Bye now.